so much mesmerizing and insightful talk. It's always mesmerizing to listen to you. We are extremely grateful to you, sir, for your towards the kind of hopelessness we are and how and what are the ways, how can we get hope out of hopelessness. It was wonderful to listen to you. We have got a lot of comments, a lot of queries. I request participants, we will take certain questions or comments from chat box also, but I would love if there is some interaction. While interacting, you could please be brief. Just introduce yourself and make a small comment or question. We would who has raised the hand first? There are some people who have raised the hands. Probably I could see Dawood. Dawood, we are unmuting you. Please go ahead with the questions. Dawood Ahmed.
ये ऑडियो बंद है
Dawood.
ये नहीं डॉक्टर मुदस्सिर
Dr. Mudassir, if you would hear Dawood hand.
Yes, am I audible?
Yes, go ahead.
Yes, my question is that humanity has witnessed two world wars. Humanity has, we in the Indian subcontinent, we have witnessed the partition of Indian subcontinent, the assassination of Mahatma Gandhi, and many more. We have witnessed the pandemics also. But the world has been never ever so hopeless. Why is it so that right now from last couple of years, are we in the contemporary world, the humanity has lost hope and people are becoming more hopeless? If already we have witnessed some such big things in the history, why is it so that this right now we are so much hopelessness is having there?
Okay. Thank you, sir. I think that it's a wonderful point, and it's not only a question, it is your question, every concerned human being, citizen, student, teacher, and it's a quest and such. And you are absolutely right that there is so much despair and the pessimism and the darkness around. And as I began my dialogue, that it's like that we are consuming poison every day. We are living with violence, smelling violence, breathing violence, and there is so much despair. And you are right that, for instance, today, and when you think, if we take the time we are passing through, say, the pandemic, and the pandemic in a way has unsettled everything, and where we could see some of the hollowness of the very modernist notion of progress, that human being is the master of the world and human being is the ultimate conqueror of, and suddenly that seems to have collapsed and the crumble. It ought to be seen as a moment of wonder, moment of humility and reflection, and to see ourselves not as conquerors but as seekers, as wanderers. But see the way we are moving today, that as if nothing we are willing to learn from this pandemic. Instead, throughout the world, most of the political and the states are using this moment to intensify all authoritarian surveillance-related strategies. And from America to Russia to other part of the country, we are seeing, the other part of the world, we are seeing this trend. A moment that could have a moment of reflection, of humility, of wonder. That moment itself today is being used for all destructive, manipulative purposes. Now, this is what, for example, really leads to a lot of despair and pessimism. And second, what is really sad is that there was a despair, that the post-World War in the 20th century, there was a huge despair. And that despair of relating to Holocaust, the fascism, the war, and that led many sensitive minds to reflect on that pessimism and despair. But also there was the hope was coming. The youth movement came in the 60s, there were feminist movements, there are ecological movements, the new social movements began to come. and trying to strive for a better world and create a new world. But again, it's a very strange cycle of the world. And today, in the age of reckless neoliberalism, and sometimes I tend to believe some of you are in a better position than me to tell, possibly the worldwide totalitarianism and the rise of the totalitarian state in a way reflects the crisis of neoliberalism today, the neoliberal market today. From America to China to Russia, now this is where, for example, a reckless totalitarianism, surveillance, and that has caused widespread despair. And as I have said, that almost transforming everything into its opposite today. Virtue is violence. Truth is insanity. Insanity is truth. Now, this is where, for example, a large-scale despair and the violence and the hopelessness comes in our time, in our world. But I would only add that possibly, the challenge, and it is in that context, I would bring the element of what with which I ended, the religiosity of life, possibly the religiosity of life, and every seeker would say that the divine sometimes tests you by putting you into darkness, in absolute difficulty. It is better to remember the divine when things are okay, things are fine. What American would have argued when life is a picnic party. But it is easy to forget the divine when things are dark. But I think that is where the real challenge lies. That where the religiosity, that whether, even in that terribly dark night, you still have that endurance and the patience to wait for the new dawn, and to see a new possibility. And that is, I think, the testing time today. And it is this testing time that is where I believe as teachers, students, we have to think of a new pedagogy of hope.
We have Bilal Kalu sir. Bilal Kalu sir, go ahead with your question, please.
Hello.
Yes, please go ahead, Bilal sir.
Okay. First of all, I will thank Professor Pathak for actually enlightening us and actually touching some aspects of pedagogy that are most relevant and more needed right now. So I have just one comment and then the question. The comment is related to what Professor Pathak has rightly actually stressed about students, scholars. They need to actually widen their this gamut of readership and touch upon the works of Manto. So, but in Manto's work in Bhanj, the Sar has already gone through it. The Naya Kanun. So the Naya Kanun, it is almost relevant right now when we find that there are new happenings taking place in the form of policies, interventions, and programs. But again, they end up at actually disappointing the common man, disappointing the common people. So in Naya Kanun as well, Manto had actually expected that this new regime or new change, this gear of things, it will have some kind of profound impact on the living of the people. But what he actually found was actually a kind of a disappointment. And this is the same story that is actually happening right now. So my question is pertaining to these four aspects that Professor Pathak has actually hit upon. One is the empathy, the reflexivity, and the ethics, and the religiosity. So you being an academician of repute, so when we are talking about this reflexivity to actually be possible, but the aspect that social sciences, from the examination point of view, as you rightly put, these we are producing these exam warriors. So how is it possible in such a scenario when we have assessment and examination and evaluation solely focusing on the objective knowledge, that is the streams like social science, arts, humanities? A student, a scholar is actually supposed to actually cram things and then resort to rote learning and simply cram up as much as information as he could so that he could face the examinations that are actually lying ahead in the future, this academic journey.
So isn't it something, this imposed kind of objective mode, a serious threat for this reflexivity to actually be a reality?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. It's a very genuine question. No, I think that absolutely, you are absolutely right. That and that's why I began with the existing pathologies, where things are actually like this: that the rote learning, hyper competition, exam pressure, bookish knowledge, success anxiety, all that make it almost impossible for any kind of humanistic, creatively nuanced critical pedagogy, almost impossible in our classrooms. And it's absolutely right, it's very exceedingly difficult. And it is also difficult for another reason, that, and it would become much more with the new education policy, that the teachers would increasingly lose their agency, would lose their agency. And teachers would increasingly become a data supplier, output of the courses, attendance sheet of the students, how many lectures, publications, and all that, the real soul of learning, that would suffer a great deal. And we all would become clerks and the data providers, object to surveillance, and the technocrats and the academic bureaucrats would rule over us. So that's a nightmare. But I believe that what is important, and that is precisely the reason that at this juncture, what is important on the part of the teaching community, all of us, school teachers, college teachers, university teachers, if there is a teachers movement, and struggle, and in that movement and struggle, as teachers, to articulate more and more that what sort of education we strive for, what sort of teaching we wish to engage with. We cannot afford to be silent. We have to articulate our voices, no matter at what form. Writing articles, articulating it in our teachers' organization, talking to it in different forums, we have to articulate. Because teachers' movement is also a pedagogic movement. We would fight for all our institutional benefits, we would fight for our pension rights, we would fight for our rights, but we would also articulate and assert that what sort of education we want, what sort of learning we want. So if, for example, farmers come to the street, yesterday it was in Punjab and Haryana, they were in the street, they are fighting against the introduction of the farmers' bill. So similarly, as teachers, we have to articulate, we have to assert, we have to tell that no, this cannot be the education. Education ought to be like this. We ought to move for a more better teacher-taught ratio in our classrooms. We ought to give more freedom to the teacher to have a pedagogic experiment. We need more innovative form of evaluation rather than what prevails today. Unfortunately, very few teaching bodies raise these questions, raise these issues. Those issues hardly we talk about. We talk about many other things which are equally important, but about the soul of teaching and learning from the teachers' bodies, it doesn't come. And we have to raise those issues, because nobody can give us dignity. Nobody can give us our location unless we trust what we are doing and unless we fight for that. So this is the moment to stand up and to fight and to speak of, fight for, with great deal of conviction, a new mode of learning, a new mode of engagement with student and teacher, a new mode of evaluation, and a new kind of a pedagogy.
I would like participants to be very brief. Just introduce yourself, your name, and go ahead with your brief comments. Next is Dr. Jasrodia. Please go ahead, ma'am. Dr. Jasrodia, are you here?
Am I audible?
You are. Please go ahead with your question.
Okay. Good afternoon, sir. Thank you so much for quite elaboration on the way you describe violence, education, modernity, development, environment. And I always wanted to listen you and meet you, but I could not get. I came last time SESI JNU. Now this technology is giving me this chance, and thanks to Manzoor also. So you have explained a lot in your previous question, but still I have a lot of question and wonder in my mind. When we look at the government and low income schools, both in rural and in urban centers, there I could not, and I am not able to see many hopes for both among their teachers and among in the students. And I also know that their role as a teacher is rather becoming more important when those schools comes up, because those schools are not equipped with many facilities and many lot of things which we required for the upliftment of the students. And even if we focus on the teachers quality and teachers themselves, they are also not aware that much, and their education is not creating so much of reflexibility, empathy and other required aspects of these for these students. And when they themselves is the result of commodified knowledge, the question is how we can cultivate these four facets that you have mentioned while talking about hope. This is my question. So yes, sir.
Thank you for raising a very important question and a very structural question. I entirely agree with you. Given the actual state of affairs, that prevails in our schools. And when you talk about the school system in India, and one thing that immediately comes to our mind is that despite the grand dream that D.S. Kothari had when this National Commission on Education in the 60s came, where Kothari would say that the destiny of New India is being shaped in our classrooms. And Kothari spoke of common schooling. The fact is that, like many grand ideals and the grand projects, we never took it seriously. Indian government, Indian state never took it seriously. So apart from moving towards common schooling, essentially we ended up with an extremely unequal, stratified form of schooling, right from very, very fancy international schools located in the metropolitan cities in India, Delhi and Bombay and Bangalore, to lot of private schools, to then Kendriya Vidyalaya, Navodaya school, to very poor quality government municipality schools without infrastructure, very bad teacher-student ratio, and the teacher completely tired and exhausted with the management of the midday meal, with by certain kind of order in a noisy classroom. And this is the reality. This is the harsh reality. And also in a corrupt society like ours, where there is a lot of trivialization of teachers training program has taken place, in a country where B.Ed degrees are bought and sold in the marketplace, in a system of this kind, and all sorts of nepotism relating to the recruitment of teachers at the school level in different states. So we see a very, very sorry state of affairs. So, and in that sense, you are absolutely right that in an environment of this kind, it is impossible right now to think of any better possibility, any kind of an alternative. Now, I agree with that. And that's why I'm saying that when I speak of those four postulates of a alternative pedagogy of hope, I'm not saying it in isolation. I'm trying to relate it to the larger politico-ethical movement that we need to engage with for when we talk about education, our right to education. Now, these are the things where we need a movement of this kind. We need better teacher-taught ratio. We need the recruitment of more qualified teachers. We need to give benefits, facilities to the teachers. Now, these are the things where we have to work for. Only thing I'm saying that we could work for that. We could engage in a movement of this kind only if you and I believe that what is going on is wrong and something new ought to be striven for. if we ourselves do not believe in reflexive pedagogy, in an alternative pedagogy, then we would never fight for that. So I think that it's an important that we relate these concerns related to the larger issues in our movement, in our resistance, in our struggle, in our demand, that we need things of that kind. And that's why when we debate on new education policies, that all those fancy concepts have come in new education policy, holistic learning, multidisciplinary, critical thinking, all sorts of things. But the question is that how we actually implement that. For implementing that, we need a lot of massive transformation in recruitment, in teachers training, in the quality of teacher, quality of schools, teacher-taught ratio. And these are the things, where we largely remain silent. The government largely remains silent. It just says a set of fancy concepts and the fancy. So this is where I believe that we have to engage in a movement, in a struggle of this kind to create a possibility of this. Right now, it is an exceedingly pessimistic scenario right now.
Thank you, sir. Sajad Badar, sir, please go ahead briefly, please. Sajad Badar, sir.
Thank you very much, and thank you, sir, for this wonderful lecture. I would briefly like to know which hope is there without larger structural changes at the top. If we look into Gandhian socio-political thought, he stood for a stateless society. He was in that sense, he was a kind of idealist and an anarchist. But in contemporary world, the state is all powerful. Even it has intruded into our lives. Surveillance is at the top. Curriculum is being instructed from the top. Even we are being looked into what we teach in our classrooms. Under these circumstances, how much hope is really there that we can bring some change in the domain, in the larger domain?
Okay. No, beautiful. I think that one point with which you began, Gandhi's, which was very unique about Gandhiji was his inherent skepticism towards a monolithic centralized state, and that's why I think that one of the important aspects of his decolonization agenda was critiquing, the very modernist notion of a monolithic centralized state and his plea for oceanic circle, decentralization, and Swaraj. And Swaraj as certain kind of a cultivation of soul force as opposed to the brute force of a gigantic machine, Now, and I think that inherent skepticism towards a very mega state and the centralized state, Gandhi also learned from his affinity with also certain kind of spiritual anarchism inherent in, for example, the likes of Thoreau or Ruskin or Tolstoy, from where also he learned the lesson of civil disobedience and issues of that kind, austerity, civil disobedience, things of this kind. So, and there's a great possibility in that notion of the Swaraj and his reminder again and again that what a very powerful centralized state could do to us. And possibly, we see the rise of totalitarian states all over the world. And it is better to be reminded of that warning that, Gandhi raised at that time. So you are absolutely right in raising that. And second point, you are absolutely right in raising the point that there is too much of invasion today by the market and as well as by the state in terms of curriculum, education. And that's why the irony of our education system today is that almost every new ruling regime, whether it is in the state government, provincial state, or at the central, with the transfer of power, we often see a lot of changes begin to take place in curriculum, and particularly social science, text, history, and things become an object of political debate and lot of interference on the part of the government and the state. And increasingly, education tends to become heavily colonized and dictated by this vested political interest. And that's a very
So we are not able to hear you. Probably you have lost the internet connection.
Freedom of teachers to speak of a new pedagogy becomes relevant, but at the same time, it is an exceedingly difficult to immediately arrive at. It's not an instant process to achieve. It's an ongoing struggle that you and I have to carry on. You and I have to strive for, fight it, because immediately it's not possible. It is a long battle that you and I have to strive for, with its scarf trajectory, with its ups and downs. And I will just end only with one point. In another discussion a couple of days back, I was talking to some school teachers, and the question of this where thing came that what do we do? I would just say it's just a point of what sociologists often talk about structuration. Anthony Giddens says the relationship between structure and agency. Yes, at times structure is very constraining, very powerful, only powerful over us. Market, state, syllabus, exam, curriculum, 45 minutes class, all those. But is agency altogether dead? Of course, agency is not unlimited. Agency has to operate under that structure. I have to complete that syllabus. I have to take that exam. I have to have class for 45 minutes. These are the structural rules. But Giddens would argue that it is possible to have a very critically nuanced creative engagement between structure and agencies. So agency, given the limitation of structure, agency can also do certain innovative tasks. And I would ask all teachers, even given the system, under this system, you are not altogether dead. You are not absolutely dead and passive. Still, there is a possibility, a limited possibility, you could experiment with. I'll just give an illustration. Suppose you, as a sociology teacher, teaching your postgraduate students 45 minutes lecture, and Foucault's Discipline and Punish is there as a text. And you have 4 lectures allotted to Foucault. And you have to complete. You have to complete Marx, you have to complete Durkheim, you have to complete Habermas, all those constants are there, you teach. But suppose you Foucault, Discipline and Punish, you teach them. You prepare them for the kind of question that the university asks. Prepare all that. And then last 5 minutes, 40 minutes you spoke of panopticon, you spoke of disciplinary space, you speak of timetable, examinations, all these techniques of surveillance, discipline, all that you speak. And then suddenly last 5 minutes you have you touch, and those 5 minutes are with you. And you ask students that, do you see a CCTV camera inside the lecture hall? How many CCTV cameras you see in your hostel corridors? Do you see CCTV cameras all around? And what does happen to you when you look at TV cameras? Does it bother you? Does it make you think that we are living in a world where suspicion is normal, surveillance is normal, where trust is a bad word, trust is seen to be stupid, suspicion is normal, surveillance is desirable and normal? Now, what does it mean to live in a world of this kind? Now, from panopticon to CCTV camera, how this transformation took place. The time when Foucault was writing that text, and 2020 when you were reading this text, what does it mean to do that? Just pose this question before them. You need not answer. That question won't be asked in the exam. In the exam, question would be asked. Explain Foucault's notion of discipline and things of that kind. The way we ask, explain four types of suicide Durkheim talked about. Plagiarized question, plagiarized answer. So this won't be asked. But out of 40 students in the class, with that example, you might have generated the seed of certain kind of critical thinking in the mind of at least one student. And if you have succeeded, you have done a great job.
Thank you, sir.
That, I believe, is still the possibility.
We would like to take the last comment from Dr. Mohammed Said Bah. Please, sir, go ahead.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much for organizing this very beautiful lecture and for arranging very, very important and the best brain of the country as a resource person. My take is that for educators, the argument made by the Paulo Freire in Body of Hope is also that even the most liberated individual can be liberated further in the world. Sir, I have a question that do you think it assumes relevance in modern world when considering that the polarization of minorities is at the peak, number one, and marginalized young learners are most of the times pushed to the wall? Sir, in one of your premier works, that was Social Implications of Schooling, Knowledge, Pedagogy, and Consciousness, you have examined various endeavors of textbook writing at the national level, and you have given the name that the social construction of India. After reviewing NEP 2020 and its objective, do you still believe that now national textbook writing is still the social construction, especially for India? And how can a nation, the biggest democracy, comes out this education fragmentation when hope remains only hope if not anchored in practice? Thank you, sir.
No, I think it's true, absolutely. But I agree with you, and I believe that and you beautifully referred to Paulo Freire, and I still insist, and I imagine that any language of resistance, a creative resistance and innovation in the field of education, if you and I, as students and teachers, educationists, seek to engage in a struggle for recovering education, not merely completing the course and conducting exam, for recovering education, then you and I have to fight a long, long battle. Our vice chancellors should misunderstand us. Our colleagues should misunderstand us. Even our students might misunderstand us. Even some student might say that has the teacher gone mad? The teacher task is only to complete the syllabus and to give me the exact guidebook where the answer will be found. Why the teacher is taking so much trouble? So it might be possible, but I believe that nothing in life, no struggle in life is possible without these obstacles, without these difficulties. And it happened, and it would always happen. But I think that, of course, it happened, it would happen. Who were the people who were assassinated, killed? Jesus was crucified. He wanted people to love. He was killed and he was crucified. Martin Luther King was killed, crucified. Gandhi was assassinated. And even that singer in the 60s, Beatles generation, what he wanted a world above heaven and hell, a beautiful world, beyond borders and boundaries, where love is possible. John Lennon, he was killed. He was assassinated. So it happens. It happens because that comes again and again. But thing is that, that there would always be spark. There would always be creative, critical possibilities. Now, Paulo Freire wrote that book, say, Pedagogy of the Oppressed. Now, with that project, with that arch, that how we overcome the oppressive language of silence, and how the marginalized, the subdued, the oppressed regain the language to define the world. And it is possible only when, as of to a banking education, there is a dialogic problem posing education. Now, Tagore imagined an alternative form. He faced extreme difficulties. It was very difficult to convince parents, to convince others, that how a poet is doing a school where there is no fixed textbook, fixed classroom, where nature, the abundance of nature becomes the finest tutor. And when children learn through relatedness, through work, through engagement, this is an exceedingly difficult task, exceedingly difficult task. So I would argue again and again that when you and I, as teachers, as students, in a world of this kind, a dreamless world, a utopialess world, a terribly violent instrumental world, in a world of this kind, when you and I would make even a slightest attempt to think differently, to imagine differently, to make certain kind of creative experimentation in our classroom, it won't be easy. It would be exceedingly difficult. But I think that despite that, the more we keep doing it, ice would begin to melt. And that is what I would argue, that is what would be alive. So today, if after 30 years of teaching, if again next morning I acquire the courage and confidence to come to the classroom and to face the young minds and talk to them about Freire and Gandhi at a time when there is violence, there is totalitarianism and all that, that I could do precisely because I could be in the vocation, because somehow the seed of that hope, seed of that epistemology of hope has not yet withered away. Although system wants me to believe that I should not dream that, I should not think of that. System wants me to be cynical. System wants me to be hopeless. But still, I seek to keep that hope alive. I still seek to keep Gandhi, Tagore, and Freire in my hand. I do not wish to throw them into dustbin. Yeah, that's a journey. That's a journey you and I have to undertake. And it's a journey. And we were talking about Gandhi. Gandhi's life was a journey, from South Africa to Champaran to Ahmedabad to Noakhali, and 30th January 1948, the prayer room at the Villa House, till the moment he was killed. So it's a journey. It's a journey.
Yes, sir. Sir, we would like to take the last comment or question from the chat box. Mahmoud Yunus Bhatt has asked, as learning agency in today's digital world cannot be confined to the formal structural boundaries, so individual learning to shaping collective conscience of the whole society has broadened and involves every institution in today's nation. Do you think that reflexivity and societal collective vision need a reference point, so that society, institutions, persons have a compass to have a judgment with broadened vision, where humanity and human values are not reduced to person and biased interpretation?
Okay, I have a beautiful question. Thank you. I think that the one point that I wish to say is that all of us today, because of the lockdown and the pandemic, are engaged in some kind of an online teaching and learning. One thing I would argue, and where I'm extremely convinced about that point, is that online teaching and learning can be a temporary substitute right now, but we should never normalize it, glamorize it, precisely for the reason that education is not merely a transmission of specialized bodies of knowledge. Education is relationship. Education is socialization. When I see in my classroom a tribal girl from Mizoram a Kashmiri boy from Srinagar, a Keralite Muslim from Trivandrum, and a Bengali boy from Kolkata sitting in the same bench, engaging in a conversation with the teacher. And after 9 to 10 class, we all come to the university coffee house and have a cup of coffee together. A different kind of learning begins to take place. Education is not just listening to YouTube lecture. Education is not just listening to professor on. Education is also about an engagement, a relationship. And this, I think, we should never lose sight of. And this is, first, I would try to argue. So it could be right now, it could be a temporary substitute, but it cannot be the soul of education. It should not be the soul of education. You and I need to meet, talk. I do agree that technology can also expand it. It has a liberating role. I do that, for example, a conversation of this kind, someone from distant Kerala or Manipur, if someone has registered, he or she could be part of it. It has a liberating, I could meet them, I could talk to them, they could talk to me. It has a liberating role. I do not negate that. But what I am saying is that it cannot be the substitute of what, a fully embedded classroom and the interaction between the teacher and the student takes place. And for many students, particularly for girl students, I have seen university life, when they come to the colleges and the universities, come to the hostel, it becomes a liberating experience for many of them. Many North Indian girls we have seen, when they come to the hostel, they came out of that patriarchal surveillance, subjugation, freely. They go to the cafeteria, come to the canteen, talk to students, attend seminars, with friends go to a cinema hall, attend a conference. These are very liberating experiences. So it has something that I just wish to speak of that. And I would also argue that even on online learning and teaching, what happened during the pandemic at certain places, really tragic. What happened is that, even today, many of my students scattered in Nagaland, Manipur, remote village in Kerala, they're saying, sir, I have only one smartphone. It's such poor internet connectivity. And in smartphone, it is so difficult to type the term paper. Now, under those circumstances, in the name of online teaching, there are many who are oppressing students, bombarding students without making any attempt to understand the location of students. Can you imagine a 3-year-old baby in a play school has to sit in front of the laptop and learn the techniques of drawing from the teacher? Now is so much of a screen timing and all that. So I think that we need little bit of, at the point I was talking about empathy and sensitivity. A Kerala girl committed suicide because she could not access. She doesn't have the laptop or the smartphone. She could not have that online access. So we need some amount of sensitivity. It's a different story that the ruling class always say very proudly that we have become digital. It's a digital India. It's a digital world. That's pure lie. That one could speak of. As teachers, I think we need certain amount of sensibility and sensitivity relating to that. Yes.
Professor Pathak, sir, it was so mesmerizing and insightful listening to you. As always, we know I have been talking to your scholars from many years that it's always pleasure to listen to you, and we love you. We would never like to stop, actually, but there's always a time, and we are also thankful to you for coming and delivering a lecture for a rural college in Kashmir. This speaks your commitment to the cause of teaching. And teachers like you give us hope in these desperate and hopeless times. I'm sure our participants must have loved it, and I'm also thankful to the participants who raised certain very critical questions for which you answered them in an amazing way. At the end, I thank everyone, and for the formal vote of thanks, I invite my colleague Mehrajuddin Bhatt, who is teaching politics at undergraduate level in our college. Mehraj Saab, please.
Thank you, Manzoor Saab. On behalf of Principal Government Degree College, Ganderbal, and Organizing Committee, I thank you all for joining us today for this important talk. Our special thanks goes to Professor Avijit Pathak, Center for Study of Social Sciences, School of Social Sciences, Jawaharlal Nehru, for his beautiful talk on pedagogy of hope. We are indebted to you, sir. You accepted our request and delivered this beautiful lecture. Our special thanks goes to faculty members of different colleges of J&K, university also, for joining us today and making this program a great success. We are also thankful to participants from Jawaharlal Nehru University, Jamia Millia Islamia, Tata Institute of Social Science, Aligarh Muslim University, IIT Delhi for joining us. Faculty of Social Sciences, Ganderbal Degree College, we also thank them for their participation. We thank Administration of Central University of Kashmir, Vice Chancellor, Registrar, IT Cell for making this program successful. Once again, we thank you all. We will meet you soon. We will organize more such programs in the future. Once again, thank you all.
Thank you, Mehraj.
Thank you very much. It's great joy to see all of you. And once things become normalized, we come out of pandemic, I feel that I would come personally, meet all of you, spend time with all of you, and share great moments with all of you. My best wishes and prayers to all of you.
Thank you once again, sir. We would love to see you here in Kashmir, sir, and interact with the scholars and students. Thank you, everyone. We are logging out.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.